Again, we'll acknowledge our First Nations custodians of the land on which we gather and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. We have a full attendance and no leave of absences, no declarations of interest on matters, no business arising, no presentation of petitions, no council or delegate reports. We'll go straight to 8.1, which is the notice of motion from Councillor Bello in relation to the complaints against the Chief Executive Officer policy. And we have a revised recommendation from this morning, ladies. All right. And it reads as follows, that the complaints about the Chief Executive Policy, Section 48A of the Crime and Corruption Act 2001, most recently adopted on the 15th of August 2023, be amended by inserting in Section 5.4, resourcing the nominated person, words equivalent to that contained in Section 11, is that a 2 or 3? 3, thank you, of Ipswich City Council's equivalent policy. And 2, Council's amended policy be presented to the Crime and Corruption Commission as required under Section 48A of the Crime and Corruption Act 2001. So that's the motion as, the updated motion as presented this morning. All right, so Councillor Bello, you're moving that?
Yes, that's correct.
Questions are fine, Councillor.
Mr. Chair, I'd certainly like to move the motion. Thank you.
Can I get a seconder, please?
I was just wanting to draw it a little better.
Yeah, that's fine, Councillor. All right, do you want to read it again?
Yes, please.
You want me to read it?
No.
Okay. All right.
I can't see it from here. You have up this.
You're probably right. Just for clarity, as I understand it, Councillor Bello, Section 11.3 of the Ipswich City Council's equivalent policy refers to the councillors being informed of the complaint. Is that right?
Yeah, I'd hope, Mr. Chair, that everybody has received a copy of the Ipswich City Council's complaints policy, so they would be able to then reference that those wordings there back to the policy, so they're familiar with it. But yes, that's correct. Page 4 of 5, in case you haven't had the chance to be across it.
Mr. Mayor, may I ask leave of Councillor Bello to actually include those words in this notice of motion so that it's not an implied notice, being that it's Section 11.3 of Ipswich City Council's equivalent policy, but the words of that Section 11.3 are actually placed there, so it's clear and concise.
That'd be good. Yeah, happy to have that. More information, the better. Councillors would be great.
All right. We probably need to give us a couple of minutes then to get that sorted with the Minutes Secretary.
Perhaps if I move the procedural, Mr. Chair, just to suspend standing orders to allow everybody to be at ease. Thank you.
All right. All in favour? Carried. Thank you.
No question. 11 starts there. If you're looking at 11.3, so that's only the doors on it?
It's attached to the report.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
that, Paddy? Ah, okay. Yep.
Mr Mayor, may I ask a question while that's being put
Of
up?
course you can, yep.
Lovely. I'll just wait. My question through you to the CEO.
Yeah, sure.
My question through you, Mr Mayor, to the CEO. Or to the CFO, or either or. In our current complaints policy, a CEO complaints policy, does Livingstone Shire Council officers tend to bring any complaints back to the table, usually?
We don't have too many of these to deal with, fortunately. And depending on the circumstance of the complaints, so if they are a PID complaint, for example, there are strict confidentiality obligations that would prevent a disclosure.
You mean public interest disclosures?
Yes.
So those type of complaints would not come back to the table because of the legislation surrounding them?
Correct. They have quite specific and strict confidentiality obligations that are under the PID Act.
Yes.
So if a matter is purely just assessed as alleged non-corrupt conduct in itself and there are no PID implications, then the nominated officer would take whatever the appropriate course of action would be. So either the mayor or myself under the current policy.
Certainly. If any complaints were assessed as corrupt, then it would come back to the table?
Generally, they would, if they are only assessed as corrupt, if they are assessed as under the PID Act. So if they're a complaint made by a disclosure as a public interest disclosure, they wouldn't in the early stance. But any decisions in regards to the CEO need to be made by the table, not the nominated officer.
Certainly. Okay, so what you're saying is that, say for example, and not that my darling husband would ever do this, but if he put a complaint in against the CEO as a general member of the public, it would go through to governance and then come back to the table. Is that correct?
The matter would actually be referred to, or depending on the severity of the complaint, it would actually be referred to the CCC. So that's what the policy requires, that any complaints in regards to the CEO are referred to the CCC.
Yes.
They would undertake an initial assessment, and in direction and in consultation with the CCC would then inform the next step.
Certainly. And so basically, Livingstone would then take advice from the Crime and Corruption Commission and undertake what they've said to do. So if it's, say for example, it's assessed as non-corrupt, then some sort of an investigation would take place just to close the loop, so to speak?
Generally, but the current policy doesn't actually cater for allegations of non-corrupt conduct against the CEO.
Okay, thank you, because they're not corrupt. Thank you.
All right, any other questions, councillors? Now, the relevant section from the Ipswich City Council policy has been added to the end. Sorry? Yeah. So I'll move to resume standing orders. All in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. All right.
Questions of the CFO.
Councillor Mather? Your light's not on either.
The question was just asked about would they come back to the council? Well, that's exactly what the policy is intending to do, because it says, and this answers the question, if the nominated person has responsibility to deal with the complaint, they must, repeat, must disclose the complaint to the council. Now, this has been deal with the complaint, and it goes on, but they must disclose the complaint to the council. Now, when we're talking confidentiality, are we talking about the council, like around the table, that's the council? Or are we talking about the public, which is obviously none of their business? And if this has been adopted, endorsed by the CCC, all we're doing is extracting that section of their policy and including it into ours, which we suspect, or I suspect, will be also endorsed because it's already previously been endorsed for Ipswich. And they've been through the mill too. And this was under an administrator, so they had a lot of scrutiny at that time. So this has been accepted by the CCC already. And now we're just saying we need to incorporate it into our policy for completion.
That's the process, is that? Yep,
That pretty right, Mr Mayor?
yep, that's,
Can I ask a question? Just on the back of Councillor Mather. So has our current policy been approved by the CCC also?
Yes.
Okay.
They all must be approved by the CCC. Yeah.
any other questions?
Yes, I have a question, Mr Mayor. I suppose it's to all three councillors that brought this to a special meeting, Councillor Bello, Councillor Mather and Councillor Eastwood. I'm not worried about who answers or doesn't answer, but certainly in August 2023, not 5 months ago, about 5 months ago I should say, we had passed a motion by the majority of this council that read, in the event that the Mayor cannot perform the function of the nominated person in a complaint against the Chief Executive Officer due to conflict of interest, the Deputy Mayor will assume this responsibility. I understand that this has recently just been ratified by the Crime and Corruption Commission, and I'm just wondering why a special meeting to basically make another amendment or an addendum to the current policy that's been ratified. What is the urgency in relation to bringing this to a special meeting and signing for a special meeting? I'd just like to understand the intent behind this, because we've already, not 5 months ago, changed the policy, and now you're wanting to change it again. And why didn't you basically include this 5 months ago? So, yeah, if you can answer that question, I'd like to know.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bello?
Yeah, I'd love to answer that question. Basically, because I'm not the source of all knowledge at a particular point in time. And I learn things along the way. And I acquire more knowledge along the way. And then curiosity becomes something in me that I want to know, can we do this? Now that I know that, that changes that. We're talking 5 months ago. I didn't know that this existed 5 months ago. So if anyone's put out by the special meeting request today, I apologise to you profusely for the inconvenience. As I said, this was attempted to be put on the agenda several weeks ago. Unfortunately, we seem to get some wires crossed, the CEO and I, which is understandable, that can happen, and so it didn't get dealt with in the ordinary meeting of the council. So we then find ourselves up here in an effort to aspire to do the very best I can. That's why I'm here.
Thank you. Councillor Mather?
This is a PID thing. And while the persons involved in the PID have been reminded of
Councillor Mather, this hasn't got
confidentiality.
anything to do with the PID. This is just about the
Well, it all comes.
complaints against the Chief Executive Officer
Well,
policy.
that's what it makes reference to here, Mr Mayor, in the policy, Ipswich. The down the line, who is responsible for what and when this occurs, if a complaint has occurred, there has been emphasis, is the word, emphasis placed, and that's part of our legal advice today. In fact, it's the foundation of our legal advice today about confidentiality, and we recognise that and respect it and adhere to it. And I said a moment ago, confidentiality, if we're dealing with some internal matters that are so restrictive that councillors can't even talk to councillors, there's something wrong. We're not about to go out there and disclose any of this information to the public, and that's the question. confidential within whom? Our policy, basically, our policy as it stands, says 5 of you aren't to know anything. You've got to sit there and wait. If anything is occurring, you'll find out in good time. This is not about telling the public. This is about the council acting responsibly, acting with confidence, acting under confidentiality, totally and explicitly. While in our policy, existing policy, the information is restricted only to select few. And even though it affects the organisation, or may affect the organisation, the Ipswich policy says, subject to Local Government Act, the nominated person in dealing with the complaint may direct senior executive employees, where appropriate, to provide assistance. That's fine. If the nominated person has responsibility to deal with the complaint, they must disclose the complaint to the council. That's what we're adding. We're putting that in to make sure that the council, as intended by this policy, is informed of what's going on within the council that they are charged with. It's as simple as that, Mr. Mayor. We believe that you have a right to know.
Thank you. I have a question, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Friend.
Councillor Mather mentioned a public interest disclosure, and she mentioned that 5 councillors don't know about it, which means 2 councillors obviously do. I'm one of the 5 that have no idea. However, I just asked Andrea, the CFO, earlier, just not 3-4 minutes ago, in relation to public interest disclosures. Am I right in saying that a public interest disclosure is under a different type of confidentiality because it's under the Whistleblower Act, and the fact that it affords, it's like that because it affords both the complainant and the defendant natural justice. Is that correct?
So I also reached out to the Chief Audit Executive at Ipswich City Council to understand how they handle a complaint against a CEO that might also be a PID. Under their policy, under section 11.2, it basically says you've got to maintain confidentiality and also observe the requirements of any other state or federal legislation.
And public interest disclosures are under state legislation?
That's correct. It's the oversight agency is the Queensland Ombudsman.
So basically, if this was to occur and any future public interest disclosures that do come to our council table basically means that the legislation at state level must change to allow councillors to obtain any information. Is that correct? As I've mentioned, the PID Act is quite strict on confidentiality obligations, and at the outcome of any investigation, it would be a decision of the table in terms of actions in regards to the CEO. Do these, we call them PIDs, but do they go to the CCC before an investigation? Are they originally sent to the Crime and Corruption Commission for advice on moving forward?
So our policy is quite clear in that any complaints in regards to the CEO must be sent to the CCC.
Yes.
And that's the first course of action. The CCC will confirm who the nominated officer is.
Yes.
In regards to dealing with the complaint. The policy is pretty clear about the next step in terms of the navigation of the process of the role of the nominated officer.
Certainly.
It's not a decision-making position, just to be clear.
Certainly, thank you. And also, this particular section of the policy, Ipswich's policy, that the councillors would like to have included in Livingstone Shire's policy, has nothing to do with PIDs. Is that correct?
Correct. So if the matter was also being assessed as a public interest disclosure, unfortunately the reporting to the council wouldn't be able to be done immediately because of the other legislative obligations in regards to confidentiality.
Just understanding if something, you mentioned, it was mentioned earlier in relation to non-corrupt conduct, which is not corrupt, that's then just investigated also. Is that correct? Would that be, I'll just rephrase that, would that be to give closure to the complainant and the defendant?
Yeah, I believe so. It is a gap of our current policy, which we will need to look at some point.
All right.
Do we have anything to follow through on that, councillor Friends?
Microphone, councillor.
So what do we have to follow through at some point, Andrea?
So I think council would be quite able to slightly amend the wording to be Livingstone specific, taking the extract from Ipswich's policy. It might even be a benefit to the policy to include the subsection 2 under there, just to be really clear around the confidentiality allegations and the overlay with other legislation that council is also obliged to comply with. So there's no issues with making the amendment to the complaints against the CEO policy as proposed by Councillor Bello.
And, sorry, could we please see the subsection 2 if this is subsection 3?
That's to do with resourcing. Resourcing under the policy for Ipswich. Subsection 211, subsection 2, resourcing the CEO or the nominated person. Is that
Yeah,
what
so I
you-
believe
is that
our
what you're
policy
referring
also
to?
says that the resourcing, so we have sufficient resources, so we don't need to include subsection 1 there, but subsection 2 in terms of having the resources and that's appropriately confidential, and that you can't really do so unless you've got specific authorisation under other pieces of legislation under the federal or common federal or state.
And I guess we can't have one without the other. If we're going to be looking at item number 11 under Ipswich, we perhaps should have put the whole lot in rather than just subsection 3. Just a thought.
Otherwise, it's
Well, that would
inherently
require an
implied.
amended motion, councillor Mather.
Well, I guess that's why the mover said that the policy be adopted in full, or something to that effect, without having to pull pieces out of it and sort of trying to glue them together.
All right, well, can I go to councillor Watson?
Through the chair to CFO. Andrea, if these changes are made to our policy, are there any advantages that you can see for us as a council compared to what we have currently?
It certainly reiterates the point under the notice of motion around ensuring that there is a forced, a prescribed process of informing the council in regards to these matters. There's no harm to be done by these inclusions.
So there's no disadvantage either?
No, I don't see there is.
Question, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Bello?
So, do we have any understanding perhaps of what sort of complaints Ipswich would be referring to here? If the nominated person has responsibility to deal with the complaint, they must disclose the complaint. What sort of complaints would they be, I wonder? So we seem to be saying that anything to do with the public interest disclosure, that wouldn't be captured under that disclosure because of confidentiality. So I wonder what other complaints would be okay to be shared with the councillors that the Crime and Corruption Commission are basically underpinning the policy on. What sort of complaints would they be?
Any allegations of non-corrupt conduct that haven't been assessed as a
Of
PID or not?
non-corrupt conduct.
Sorry, or of non-corrupt conduct or corrupt conduct that haven't been assessed as a PID.
So
I'm not going to comment on the types of examples that Ipswich City Council.
the ones
dealt
in
with under
here
their
that
policy.
they talk about, that might trigger, this is the sort of stuff in here that might be triggered in terms of corrupt conduct. It could be fraud and theft, extortion, unauthorised release of information, obtaining or offering a secret commission, and nepotism. So those types of things could well and truly come through a public interest disclosure. So we're suggesting that they wouldn't be the type of things that Ipswich Council, as this policy informs, would want disclosed to their councillors.
If they are a PID, they would be unable to be disclosed to the councillors, but those examples that you've mentioned from their policy could be identified through any number of ways. So there might be other ways for these allegations.
What other ways could somebody report extortion or fraud or theft or to the CCC? And the purpose of the PID is to provide that person a level of protection, of anonymity, but that's what triggers it. Once it gets into this bracket, it gets triggered into a public interest disclosure status because the person feels the need to be protected because of the seriousness of the complaints. So I'm fascinated to understand that public interest disclosures wouldn't be covered within this policy, given that the types of actions are very, very serious, and that's why it's talking about corrupt conduct. But I'd certainly look forward to debating this, and who knows what we might find out in our future inquiries about public interest disclosures and whether councillors can know about them.
Is there a question here for the CFO, Councillor Bello?
Yeah, there was a question.
Righto.
Exactly.
Well,
How
perhaps if you
would-
give her an opportunity to answer, she might be able to.
Certainly. How would, or indeed any person may like to answer this, perhaps the CEO, he's obviously very senior in his role. Fraud and theft, extortion, all these types of things, it would not be uncommon for them to come through a public interest disclosure. Would that be a reasonable statement?
Yeah, that's not an unreasonable statement. There's plenty that are made that are not requested to be managed in that way, so the CCC might deal with them differently. But as you've heard from multiple sources, and I think another one tomorrow is going to talk to you about the special level of sensitive handling of ones that are classified as a public interest disclosure. We're not debating public interest disclosures today. We're debating a insertion into a report, and you've heard the CFO say, put it in, debate away, add it, don't add it. This is about the policy generally, as I understand it, and then how that applies into the future. I mean, fortunately, as the CFO pointed out, these things only get called up very rarely. In fact, unless I've missed something, I'm not aware of any corrupt conduct allegations, at least in the last few years anyway.
Mr. CEO, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Amanda.
You've done it again.
Yeah.
But these questions are important because they're all separate questions that have their own story. But what I see is happening here, it's all coming together to form a picture as to where we go with what.
Yeah, but I do take the CEO's comments. We're here today to debate this particular notice of motion, which is in relation to an addition to the policy.
And that might
We're not
fit
here
in
talking
with something else.
about PIDs.
Slot in.
Sorry?
It might slot in with other things that come to pass
Well,
after that.
perhaps at some stage in the future, Councillor Mather, but not today.
When we get sort of clarity, but that's okay. But I'm just saying it will all form a picture in the end.
Possibly. All right. Councillor Bello, you're moving this particular notice of motion, I take
Yes,
it?
yep, that is correct, Mr Chair.
Seconding Councillor
Mr.
Mather.
Mayor.
All right, so we'll get debate started. Councillor Bello, do you want to speak to this particular notice?
Yeah, thank you, Mr Chair. Councillors, I've put this before us here because I believe it is incumbent on us to provide the highest level of transparent and accountable governance that we can. The section under the Act, I think it's 265, which talks about us, which you guys supported previously, which talks about us being responsible for the performance of the council. In order to do that, it's critical and fundamental that we have all the information that we need to know, and that we're able to then make judgments based on that information as to what we do moving forward. I was extremely impressed with Ipswich City Council's policy on complaints against the CEO relating to corrupt conduct, and I certainly endorse our CEO's comments about, thankfully, they're not something that come up too often. But nevertheless, it's critical that we aspire to do the best we possibly can by the community. This policy, in my opinion, is better than ours. And when I rang the Ipswich Mayor there, Teresa, forgive me for not knowing her surname, someone else
Harding.
might, Teresa Harding. I commented to her how impressed I was with the level of transparency and accountability reflected in the policy, and specifically that councillors must be informed about complaints relating to their CEO so that they can make decisions as they see justified, because they do have a role to play in managing the performance of the CEO. To suggest that public interest disclosures are not embedded in these things, I share a different opinion on that. In fact, they actually make up quite often how complaints of a corrupt nature to the CCC are actually received. And importantly, there are the confidentiality requirements related around them. But I don't believe that that should prevent councillors being aware. And this policy, I believe, absolutely allows for that disclosure to occur. It would seem as if there's some disagreement on that. I would certainly look forward to getting that clarified, because ultimately this process should not be subjective to different people thinking maybe this is how it should be. It should be as clear and as black and white as possible, and that's why this policy here goes a long way to delivering that by full disclosure to the councillors, because they should know. So that is about it.
Thank you. Anyone speaking against? Councillor Swadden.
I'm just looking at the policy now, and I've had a look at both policies and read both and have a great understanding and interpretation around legislation and policy. And it's pretty clear in both policies they make certain opinions and points, but in my opinion, looking at both policies, our policy is just as good, if not better, for that. Because at the end of the day, councillors will have to make a decision. It will come to the table, and it will be, and we will vote on those decisions that are made. But you know, we don't need to get into the nitty gritty of it all. It seems to be that's what, in my opinion, it feels like we're doing, trying to get into the nitty gritty of it all. I think I like the Ipswich one. Yes, it's good, but ours is equally as good. So I think I'm happy to stay with our policy.
Thank you. Anyone speaking in support? Councillor Mather.
Councillor Swadden thinks he's not going to get into the nitty-gritty of everything in this council. He's got no learning coming, because that's our job.
Point of order, no, I don't need to get into anyone's nitty-gritty. We're here to make decisions for the whole of the community, not for our own personal gain either.
It's got nothing to do with personal gains there. It's not a personal thing, but that's what this is all about. Being prepared to drill down to find the truth or to find a better way of doing business. Mr. Mayor, our policy was okay with the information we had at the time. Ipswich, as a council, had been through hell and high water. Mayor went to jail, CEO, I think it was, went to jail, or one of the head brass. And of course, the administrator came in, and if anybody has been through the hoops as far as scrutiny goes and whether it applies and where it applies, it's Ipswich. And I think it's a good model to be guided by. Ours was okay, like I said, with the information we had at the time. It's like anything, you look for something better, you go along with it, you try to amend what you had originally. I wouldn't have had a problem adopting the whole of the policy for Ipswich, because I did read it several times. I thought it expanded a little bit in areas that I wasn't particularly interested in, but like I said, everything comes together in time. And I think if it's going to tighten ours, strengthen ours, make ours a little bit more transparent, then I don't have a problem with it. In fact, I would support it all the way, simply because we are looking at doing things better in everything we do. And this is one area that we really need to get it right and fair to all persons involved. And I personally believe that if there's something going on at a high level, as far as complaints go, serious complaints, the whole table needs to be aware of it. Nobody's hiding anything, but I believe that if there's something there that allows you to know, all of us to know, then we need to make sure that you have access to that information. It's as simple as that, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Mather. Anyone speaking against? Anyone else like to speak for?
I'll speak for it, Mr. Mayor. I'm not going to say much. He was a councillor that went through the ringer, and I imagine they'd have the best policy that you can possibly get. I'm encouraged by the I don't want to put words in their mouth, but the CEO and the CFO both, I think, suggested in our comments that they endorsed these additions. Please say now if
I think the word was there was no harm.
there's no harm.
Yeah.
So I think that these additions actually add to our policy, and they can't bring any disfavour to it. They're going to make it a better policy and probably more transparent. So I support it.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak before we go back to Councillor Bello to wrap up? All right. Councillor Bello.
Yeah, ultimately it is our responsibility to get down into the nitty gritty. It's hard work, whether you like it or not. But without doing that, you don't fully understand and comprehend something. So if I'm guilty of getting into the nitty gritty or attempting to in this process, I'll stand guilty before the community. But I fervently believe that this is a better policy specifically for the reason that councillors are included in complaints about their CEO. And when I spoke with Teresa Harding, and she said, Councillor Bello, you councillors must know. It is absolutely imperative. The more you know, the better. So for me, if that's what the nitty-gritty has revealed, I will rest easy and I'll accept that some would say it's not necessary to go that far. I welcome what other councils write in their policies. I welcome what other councils have developed and collaborating with them to come up with better resources so that we don't stay within our own little silos, but we learn from other councils at the same time. That's what the family of local government does. That's what it's about. Improving on what you can. You've only got limited resources with your staff and with councillors, so why not learn from other councils? And you all, as they say, it's a lifting tide raises all boats. You all get better and better. So I'm appreciative of the contact I had with the Ipswich Mayor, and I think there's good reasons to do this, and I look forward to what comes from it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bello. We'll wrap up debate, councillors. We've got we have a mover and a seconder. Moved Councillor Bello and seconded Councillor Mather. All in favour? Those against? Lost. And that could...
I'd like to know why people won't support something that's going to improve our policy, that's all.
Well, Councillor Mather, people are entitled to vote how they want to vote. If they don't want to make a statement, that's up to them.
I mean, if we're all here for transparent reasons, and I can't see why people would not support that. I mean, I'm not condemning at all, I wouldn't try that.
Well, it's kind of how it comes across,
Some
Councillor.
people go to a lot of trouble to find better ways of doing business.
All right, thank you.